You guys might not believe this, but growing up, I was a die-hard Legolas fan. This was, of course, a matter of necessity, as my older sister already had dibs on Aragorn, but I didn't mind. I mean, he was a dreamboat. The long hair, the sick moves, the fact that he was Orlando Bloom. The guy had a lot going for him. As I got older, though, my sister's dibs expired, and I found myself kind of moving on from Legolas. It's not that I ever stopped liking him, it's just that, well, he barely talks at all. In fact, many have pointed out that he literally only says one thing directly to Frodo in the entire film trilogy.
And you have my bow.
And once I got older and I had read the books, I was still a bit confused. This character is pretty heavily featured in every single one of the books in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, so why is it that he feels so much like an afterthought? So going into writing this video, I was very excited to do a deeper dive on this character and figure out why he was in the story and what Tolkien wanted his purpose to be. So today we're going to take a look at Legolas, figure out what purpose he serves, how he does this so masterfully from the background of the story, and talk about the changes that had to be made in this character when he was brought to the big screen. So let's begin in the books, where Legolas is, I think, very intentionally left as a secondary character. This was done because we already have main characters, the hobbits. Hobbits are the most outright human characters in the story, the most down-to-earth, the most accessible, and it is through their very familiar eyes that we, as the audience, are able to explore Middle-earth. But that doesn't mean that they're the only characters that we get insight on. We learn an awful lot about Aragorn, we get insight on Boromir's emotional turmoil, we see Éowyn's character arc, and yet Legolas remains rather remote. And this is because Legolas is intended to be representative of the elven race as a whole. He's the only elf in the Fellowship, and although we see a lot of elves in the story, Legolas is probably the one that gets the most page time. And so by examining some of Legolas's character traits, we are able to draw larger conclusions about the elven race as a whole. First off, it's made clear to us that Legolas is from an entirely different time. His age is never specified by Tolkien, but everything about him reads as anachronistic. Possibly thousands of years old, he uses the wisdom and knowledge that he's accumulated over hundreds of human lifetimes in order to guide and educate the Fellowship. He recognizes the fearsome Balrog at only a glance, he finds kinship with the ancient forest of Fangorn, and he tells tales and songs such as the Lay of Nimrodel. The narrative is laced through with Legolas's interjections, weaving a tapestry of history, myth, and storytelling that he's learned over his many years walking Middle-earth. And Tolkien writes this age, this out-of-time quality into the very fibers of Legolas's character. When he sees the Balrog, Legolas laments, crying, "Aye, aye, a Balrog is come." Cries like this, like "aye," are used very sparingly throughout the Lord of the Rings, and it reminded me a little bit of ancient Greek plays, among other things, where they would use these exclamations like "aye" or "oh" to represent these waves of overwhelming emotion experienced by the heroes of these stories that burst through the emotional dams that they've built. It's a writing convention that has almost entirely been lost to time. I mean, when's the last time you heard someone say yikes in an adult fantasy novel? But by putting this word in Legolas's mouth, Tolkien evokes a much older storytelling tradition. This is also infused into the way that Legolas talks on a daily basis. While most of the Fellowship speaks pretty normally, just using normal human speech patterns, Legolas very frequently makes use of inverted word order. For example, in the Council of Elrond, Legolas could have said something like, "I must now tell the tidings that I was sent to bring." Instead, he says, "The tidings that I was sent to bring must now be told." It's a style of speaking that is very intentionally not contemporary or direct. But it also doesn't sound pretentious or intentionally confusing. Instead, it acts as a subtle cue to the reader that this character exists in a completely different time than most of the characters. Throughout the books, it's made clear to us that Legolas is not just another man. He's an ageless being, so far beyond our concept of time and wrapped in wisdom that he can't even speak like we do. It's never heavy-handed, but as the representative of all of elven kind, Legolas shows us that elves are completely alien to humans or hobbits or any other audience insert characters that we might find ourselves relating to. And yet, they're not cold or unlikable because of this alienation. Legolas frequently shows a much softer side, especially to his new friends in the Fellowship. He defends them in battle, he sings with Aragorn to mourn the loss of Boromir, and he even finds the time to tease his companions for his evident elven superiority. When the company is bogged down in the snow of the Misty Mountains, desperately trying to trudge through massive snowdrifts, Legolas watched them for a while with a smile upon his lips, and then he turned to the others. "The strongest must seek a way, say you. But I say, let a plowman plow, but choose an otter for swimming, and for running light over grass and leaf, or over snow, an elf." Legolas is totally willing to watch Aragorn and Boromir struggle through the snow for quite a while, and of course he's gonna brag about how much cooler elves are when given the chance, but he's perfectly willing to help his companions, trotting light-footedly over the snow in order to help them. Legolas seems genuinely playful and willing to laugh, a characteristic found in many other elves. This is epitomized in his relationship with Gimli, who is the archetypical dwarf in the company. Legolas and Gimli begin their relationship sharply at odds with each other. Elves and dwarves have been blood rivals for centuries at this point, both hard-headed and stubborn in their own particular ways, and at first Legolas and Gimli allow this conflict to divide them. However, when Gimli allows himself to fall in love with the elven beauty of Lothlorien and Galadriel, Legolas sees this softer side to him, and they begin to get along much better. I mean, it makes sense. They're both some of the most world-weary people in the Fellowship, they're accomplished fighters, they're both stubborn, and they both have their own particular eyes for beauty. At one point, Gimli desperately tries to convince a reluctant Legolas of the beauty of the glittering caves behind Helm's Deep. Legolas doesn't like caves, so he doesn't think they could be as beautiful as Gimli describes, but Gimli waxes poetic and brings Legolas over to his side. At that point, they agree that when the quest is over, they're going to travel together, so that Gimli can show Legolas the beautiful glittering caves, and Legolas can show Gimli the beauty of the forests of Middle-earth. In the appendices, Tolkien reveals that in all likelihood, Gimli and Legolas stayed together for some time after this, and that their relationship was so strong that when Legolas's time came and he passed over the sea to the Undying Lands, Gimli went with him. This stubborn, driven affection that we see from Legolas is something that we find in a lot of other elves. They're shown to be fiercely, stubbornly loyal, even if it's the kind of loyalty that comes with its own fair amount of teasing and braggadociousness. In the narrative, Legolas is shown to be, above all, a marvelously affectionate and caring friend and companion. And his larger character arc across the novels is also reflective of the character arc of elven kind as a whole. Legolas's name translates to green leaves. He was named after the beautiful forests of Mirkwood that he was born in and called home for many years of his life. He is a Sindar elf, a group of the elves that fell so deeply in love with Middle-earth and its forests that they stayed behind, even when given the chance to cross over into Aman, the Undying Lands. His kin have made the forests of Middle-earth their home for millennia, and Legolas deeply loves and knows his land. However, the elves are not destined to stay in Middle-earth forever. As evil grows in the land, it seems to sap the magic from elves, leaving them less powerful and influential as time drags onward. The world is aging, and they are not, and they come to believe that it is time for them to pass on. The destruction of the ring and the elimination of Sauron's power in Middle-earth marks a turning point, a shift from the Third Age to the Fourth, the age of elves and magic, to the age of mortal mankind. There was no more room for the elves in Middle-earth, and so they had to decide whether they would linger in Middle-earth and watch their power slowly diminish, or if they would submit to their inherent longing for the sea and pass over into Aman, the Undying Lands where they would remain ageless and peaceful forever. Legolas begins The Lord of the Rings with little thought of the west of Aman. He only cares for his forests, his lands in Mirkwood. But throughout the narrative, we see this strength of will be shaken. Galadriel is the first one to bring this up, saying to him, "Legolas Greenleaf long under tree, enjoy thou hast lived, beware of the sea. If thou hearest the cry of the gull on the shore, Thy heart shall then rest in the forest no more. This warning seems to lay heavy on his heart through the rest of the story. And though he sees many wondrous things in Middle-earth, when the battle is over and Sauron is defeated, it seems the call of the sea is stronger than ever. On the ashes of the battlefield of the final battle, Legolas remarks that he thinks that he'll explore Middle-earth for some time longer, but that he now knows how his story will end. He sings, to the sea, the white gulls are crying, the wind is blowing, and the white foam is flying, west, west away. The round sun is falling, grey ship, do you hear them calling? The voices of my people that have gone before me. I will leave the woods that bore me, for our days are ending, our years failing. I will pass the wide waters lonely sailing. Thus, his arc reflects the path that most elves will have to take. They are creatures of contradiction, of longing. They love Middle-earth, but they must leave it. They come to care for mortals, but they must be with their own kind. They are ageless, and yet, because of this, they feel the aging of the world much more acutely. Tolkien created Legolas to be a microcosm of his whole elven race. Yes, he is a background character, because he must be. His role in the background is the role that all elves must come to take in Middle-earth, learning and growing and loving, but destined to fade away, consumed by a longing to pass over the sea and beyond. And this was all made possible by the fact that The Lord of the Rings is a book. Tolkien understood just how to craft a character of this much depth and complexity in the time and space allowed him by the story. And so when The Lord of the Rings was taken from a novel to a movie, a lot was going to have to change. And already it was going to be much more difficult to show Legolas's age on screen. They couldn't exactly choose an older actor, since Legolas is meant to be ageless, but admittedly, Orlando Bloom looks young in those films. And of course he looked young. I mean, he was only like 22 or 23 when they were filming those movies, which, as a 24-year-old, is sending me into a bit of an existential crisis. So he certainly doesn't look old, and they didn't seem to want to give him the out-of-time speaking style that ages him in the books. I really don't love this choice, since this would have been a super easy thing to just carry over from novel to script, but if I had to guess why they didn't include it, I would say it's probably because they were worried about alienating audiences. A lot of people walking into those theaters already thought of The Lord of the Rings as a bit outdated and stuffy. So having Orlando Bloom walk onto screen and say, "The tidings that I have been sent to bring must now be told," it may have garnered a few more laughs than an understanding of the inherent anachronism of the elven race. They also cut out pretty much all of the historical exposition that characterizes book Legolas. And I get it, they just couldn't include most of the music and poetry contained in the original books. It would have messed with the pacing of an already very, very difficult to pace film, but I do think it's a shame. Without that, we're left to be told that Legolas is old, with next to no on-screen evidence that this is the case. They also washed out much of Legolas's softer side, leaving us with a very one-dimensional archetype of the elvish race. Legolas very rarely laughs or goofs in the films, and the humor that he does have is much more sharp and harsh than the books ever dared. His relationship with Gimli is characterized by really harsh humor, often laughing at Gimli rather than with him. This is a far cry from the tenderness and mutual respect that grows between them in the novel. And I think a lot of this can be largely attributed to the changes that Peter Jackson and his team made to Gimli's character. I discussed this in depth in my Gimli book versus movie video, which I'll link above, but a lot of his wisdom, grace, and good humor was taken away completely when he was adapted for the screen. The dwarf we're left with is irritatingly stubborn, brash, and easily bothered. And Legolas is there at his side, ready to make him the butt of the joke, over...
Or would you like me to find you a box?
And over... and over again.
Don't tell the elf.
It allowed the writers to make punchier jokes that would fit into the very tight, action-packed timing of the films, but it thins out their characters, giving them a much harsher edgier friendship that I think is pretty unflattering to the larger picture of the elven race. Elves are meant to be smug, and they definitely tease their friends a lot, but they were never meant to be outright assholes. We lose the Legolas that sings to mourn Boromir's death, that tells his friends the tale of the lost elven maiden Nimrodel, and the elf that would eventually take his dying dwarven friend with him to the Undying Lands. I think that Peter Jackson eliminating the sillier, softer side of elves and of Legolas can also be attributed to the fact that they felt they had to make the elves in The Lord of the Rings a different kind of elf. And even Tolkien grappled with this in his own writing. Elves, which had once been thought of as powerful, noble creatures by Norse and Germanic mythology, had been reduced in the modern age by rationality into whimsical little playthings. Shakespeare wrote about tiny little sprites, and Irish folklore tells of little pixies living in mounds, and this was no better by the time that Peter Jackson was retelling the tale. Silly little Christmas elves with their little striped stockings were plastered everywhere, Tinkerbell had become a cultural staple, and the Will Ferrell movie Elf came out only a month before Return of the Kings hit theaters. They did need to combat this cultural notion of the silly, frivolous elf, but in doing so, they may have swung a little bit too far into the serious. Peter Jackson removes much of the joy and whimsy from Tolkien's elves, leaving them frowning and severe, snarky instead of jovial, and aloof instead of passionate. And with all of these changes, we almost completely miss out on Legolas's character arc, his change from loving Middle-earth to deciding to leave it in the end. In fact, this whole plotline is largely skimmed over for most of the elves, including Legolas. We see no warnings that the sea may one day call him home, none of this tension of his love for Middle-earth and his need to leave it, none of the exhaustion of seeing the world pass beyond his grasp. In order to write this character into a new medium, to mesh him in with all of the other transformed characters, to make him the encompassment of the elven race as Peter Jackson presented it, most of the intrigue, nuance, and joy of the original character of Legolas had to be lost. What's most interesting to me here is that Legolas, even in the books, is a bit of an afterthought. Originally, the token elf in the Fellowship was going to be the much more well-rounded and developed character of Glorfindel, but Tolkien decided that he was just a bit too powerful and popular to be taken on such a covert mission. It would be like bringing Elvis to help you get your passport photo taken. Just way too much commotion. Instead, Tolkien created Legolas, a simple reflection of the whims and ways of the elven race. And in the books, this simplicity works. Movie Legolas serves a similar purpose, characterizing the elven race as Peter Jackson was able to present it, but it's a much less flattering illumination, showing how thin these characters become when you remove all of the things that made them special in the first place. Of course, I don't hate Legolas in the movies. He's quite funny, and his relationship with Gimli does have a lot of heart. I mean, I cry every time. Orlando Bloom does a great job with the performance, and his sort of naive, fish out of water quality that he brings to the character is quite charming. And honestly, I think this character serves the films just fine. They didn't have the time or space to develop another really fully well-rounded, fleshed out character, and so they relegated him to the background. And if anything, I think this just goes to show that that Tolkien guy really knew what he was talking about. However stunning the movies may be, and they are, the best format for this story will always be a novel, where even a background archetypical elf can feel fully fleshed out, well-developed, and lovable. This video is actually a long time coming because it was the first one in this book versus movie series that I thought of. Well, technically my sister thought of it. She told me about how when Legolas first sees the Balrog, he goes, I, and she thought that that would have been really weird to put on camera directly. And she was right. That would be really, really weird. But I think that Legolas does kind of epitomize the sometimes extreme changes that have to be made when a story is taken from one medium to another. The fact is that mediums are not interchangeable, and rather than looking at this as a limitation, I think we should see it as an opportunity for new and incredible modes of storytelling. It has become so deafeningly bright behind me that it looks like I'm gonna pass into the Undying Lands, so I guess that wraps this video up. I would would love to hear your perspective on this in the comments, because I think it is going to be kind of divided. So let me know whether you prefer book Legolas or movie Legolas, and why. Like this video if you enjoyed it, because it really helps the channel out, and if you like videos about storytelling, fantasy, and the Lord of the Rings, consider subscribing. Thank you so much for hanging out with me this week, and I hope that you have a very happy, hobbity day.